Welcome, everyone. This is the Parts View Exchange Talks Boating Podcast. Here we chat about all things boating with marine industry professionals and enthusiasts who spend all the time they can out on the water.
Hi, this is Tanya Becker, and I'm your host for today's episode of Parts View Exchange Talks Boating. I'm joined by my guests, Garrett Paquette, a professional angler competing within the Bassmaster Elite Series, and Neil Kempf, the electronics specialist at Naples Boat Mart. Today we'll talk about marine electronics, specifically navigation, fish finding, and underwater structure identification. I'm thrilled to have both Garrett and Neil for this discussion because I think it's safe to say that their experiences and days out on the water are quite a bit different. Garrett spends his days on lakes and rivers, focusing on honing his effectiveness as a bass angler. Neil primarily fishes offshore, and many of Naples Boat Mart's customers are also focused on offshore fishing and offshore excursions. So let's dig in. Neil, as we discuss some of the things we wanted to talk about today, you joke that the bass Garrett fishes for are about the size of the bait for your target species. Obviously, freshwater bass fishing and offshore saltwater fishing are two very different things. In your professional life at Naples Boat Mart, I know a lot of your customers boat and fish offshore, but some of your customers also that you work with also have smaller boats and stay closer to the shore, or maybe boat on smaller bodies of water. How do you approach recommending electronics and electronic configurations for the customers that you work with?
Primarily ask the question, what are you going to do with the electronics? You think that a lot of the customers that we deal in are fishermen, but a majority of them really are cruisers. They don't really fish that much. So you have a wide spectrum of electronics that can do both, and you have some that are very specific to doing specific type things for offshore or backwater. And the other thing I've learned is don't recommend a brand of electronics. Let the customer come to you if they know what they like and they've used them before. Trying to teach somebody something completely different gets very complicated. So we see a variety of electronics from every manufacturer, and we see a variety of rigging from every customer. So it's kind of curtailed to what they want it for and what they're going to do with it.
Do you find you have to kind of talk customers through sometimes, what they, help them with that decision-making process to help them figure out what they actually need?
If it's an experienced boater, normally you can point them in the newer technology and things they haven't seen. If it's a novice boater that doesn't really know anything, the primary goal that you're working off of is going into something that is simple to use and performs very basic needs to get them where they're going and to get them back home again safely. But most customers that we deal in the bigger boats have had boats and they've had electronics and they've used a lot of different electronics. Whereas the smaller boats that we run, the 27 and under class, normally what we'll see is they don't really have an idea of what they need or what they want. And then, of course, we get the customer that really doesn't know what he needs and what he wants, but his next door neighbor has told him everything he should have, which usually ends up running the price tag up about twice as much as he really should have spent. But it's we like to see all different levels. And Naples Boat Mart, when we deliver a boat, we also provide some basic training on all the electronics and how to use them. And just like the internet today, there's very few electronics today that you can't go on YouTube and find instructional videos for, which helps tremendously.
So, Garrett, I'm going to ask you to share your thoughts from two different perspectives. I mean, obviously, as a professional bass angler, you have some pretty specific marine electronic needs. Can you share your approach to your electronics as a professional? And then also, I think you help friends or other kind of fishing, buddies and so forth, pick out electronics and so forth. What decision-making advice do you typically give those folks?
Definitely. Yeah. So for me personally, competing around the country, high stakes tournaments, trying to catch the biggest 5 fish we can a day. It's, you want to give yourself the best advantage. You want to have the newest, the greatest technology. It almost seems like it's getting out of control. It looks like our boat's like a NASA data center or something. We got so many screens and all this going on, but it's almost a controversy now in the sport because there's so much technology getting out there. But unfortunately, that's what it takes to compete. So I'm rigging my boat on what I think gives me the best chance to go out there and find the most fish the easiest. I mean, that's the reality of the sport. So I got different things at the console for when I'm driving around looking for the fish. And then when I stand up on the trolling motor, I got all sorts of little things that are going to help me put more fish in the boat. And, in my situation, it's what's necessary to compete. But for the average person, and like you're saying, that the discussions I have with my friends, it's probably a little overkill. Kind of like what Neil was saying. The one thing I think, kind of my rule with electronics is, one, obviously these can get pretty expensive. You don't want to get out of your price range, but I do think, having the nicest equipment or the biggest screens you can, that's comfortable for you. Why not? You spend a bunch of money on a boat, you might as well enjoy your experience that much more and make it much more safer for you. If you have a good GPS, if you have good mapping, that's one, it's going to make it, if you're fishing, easier to find the fish, but just being safe on the water, not running aground with rock piles that you don't see because you didn't want to buy a map chip, things like that. Having a sonar that's reading the whole time so you can see if you're about to run up on a sandbar. Those are very important things. So I think at minimum, you want to have something out there that's going to at least keep you safe on the water, make sure you can get out there, not hit bottom, and make it back. I think if you're running a ways offshore, you're running in a lake that you've never been to, a GPS is absolutely minimum. Just to make sure you can get back to where you started and you don't end up getting lost out there and run out of gas and going through those horror stories you hear. So when I'm talking to my friends, the basic needs, those are two: the sonar and the GPS at your steering wheel where you're going to be driving the boat. And then if you want to branch out and start putting fish finders on where you're fishing that fit your price range, we talk about that. But I think safety is the first thing that comes into mind when selecting electronics.
Have you seen any, as your role as an electronics specialist at Naples Boat Mart? I mean, have you seen any interesting, navigation or fish finding kind of technology advancements in recent years?
The most advanced we've seen is probably in sonar technology. With the Chirp technology that was released by Airmar several years ago, the quality of picture that we get, whether it's backwater with side view, clear view, down view, each brand specific has its own terminology it uses as far as what that type of sonar you're using. But Chirp technology is used across the board now, and that type of technology has allowed us a lot cleaner picture, a lot more targeted species, a lot better results, because whether we're fishing in 200 feet of water, which in our world, Garrett, is 100 miles from here offshore, because it goes about 2 feet per mile on the west coast of Florida, or if we're fishing down in the Keys and we're targeting sailfish, or we're targeting swordfish, or we're bottom fishing for queen snapper. Just the technology itself has cleaned the bottom picture up so good that you can actually tell what you're fishing for a lot easier, which is great for fishing and putting fish on the boat. It's also great for not targeting species that you don't want to kill on the way to the surface. So that's been the biggest advancement we've seen probably in the fishing side of it. And from a navigation side, charting has improved 3,000% over what it was even 5 years ago. We just get that much more accurate charting. The GPS signal that we're getting now and the 10 hertz signal that we're tracking is so much more accurate than it ever was before. They've brought out solid state radars, which are cleaner pictures, much better for the average captain from a navigation standpoint. So you're getting a lot more information at the helm. Like Garrett said, the bigger the screen you can put up there, the easier it's going to be to use. Most people don't realize that, on even a bigger boat, you have 2 screens, but you might have 3 functions. So the biggest screen you put up there, split that in half, and that's going to be your average screen size per function. So you really want to make sure that that screen's big enough to do what you can. And it's a budget issue. How much can you afford to spend, and what do you really want to do with it when you use it? So.
Do you find that? Have you found that Chirp technology, the clarity of being able to see down in the water? I mean, has that helped you better target fish?
Yeah, so we the Chirp is more related to like a 2D sonar, and I do use that when I'm running on plane. when my boat's in motion. But typically when I'm looking around or I'm actually looking for fish, I'm using what's called down imaging, which is even a little more of a precise sonar than Chirp. It's not going to read as deep, or it's not going to read at high speeds at all. But typically when I'm looking for fish, I'm only going 3 or 4 miles an hour. My boat's in gear. So I'm using the down imaging, and it's the same way. It used to be where you'd mark something on the graph and you'd have to kind of fish and see what it is. I can tell exactly by how the dots look and what size they are. I can tell the species of the fish. I can tell the size of the fish. I can tell if they're active and they're ready to feed. So I do use that down imaging a lot when I'm looking for fish. And then the 2D sonar for me is mostly when I'm running on plane. I'll use it. Maybe I'll see like a little group of weeds that comes up, or just looking at the bottom to make sure I'm running in a safe depth to be running. That's more of where my Chirp sonar comes into play.
So, I think you've done a lot of like interesting kind of electronic setups and configurations that you sort of not invented yourself, but kind of configured yourself. And I know, again, your needs as a professional fisherman. I mean, you're pretty driven to do this just to help you to perform better in tournaments. But what are some of these, what are some of the things that you've done beyond just basic configuration and installation? What do those things look like?
Yeah, so I mean, how my boat is rigged, I have one 15-inch unit, which is, it's pretty, for the freshwater market, that's a big unit. I got one 15-inch unit at the console, and most of the time I'm running side imaging. I run all Hummingbirds, I'll say that. So I run side imaging, which is going to show me a view on each side of the boat as far as I want it. Usually I got it around like 90 feet, so I can see 90 feet each way. And then I run down imaging, which is straight down, and then I have my lake master mapping. That's kind of how my console looks. And then when I get to the front of the boat, that's where it gets real interesting. So I have one map I have 3 units up there, 3 10-inch units, and I have one that is mapping and 2D, straight sonar down off of my trolling motor. So if I see anything straight under the boat, I can drop my bait down and try to catch it, and it shows me the depth at all times. And then I have another one, which is called 360 imaging. So it comes off my trolling motor, and it's a rotating circle, and it shows what's on the bottom in front of me. It's a big sweeping circle that shows me everything within like 80 feet of the boat. So if I see a brush pile off to the left, I can make a cast to it, or I see, a rock pile. It just shows the bottom all around the boat. And then new for this year is a forward sonar called Hummingbird Mega Live, and that's a direct beam that comes off the trolling motor, and I can point it each way and just sweep around and see fish. So I can look, if I have a bunch of rocks in front of the boat, I can point my trolling motor at it and then see, okay, there's a fish over here, and cast straight to it, watch my bait fall straight down and watch how the fish reacts to it. So that's been a lot of fun to play with, and that's the ultimate learning tool, because I mean, when you're fishing for fish, you're not exactly seeing how they react. So you're changing baits, you're thinking they're not biting, but I can see in live time now if that fish comes up to my bait, turns around, I can switch colors, I can try a different bait, or I can see if they're reacting well to it, and just catch them. So that's my setup. But yeah, I think I got them all mounted, and every boat is different on how you're going to mount your electronics. You just got to kind of make something with what works. I got one right into the console, right on my fiberglass, and then I have a plate up front that holds all 3 of those. And that's going to be different per brand of boat. But I think one thing that's starting to get talked about, and this is something I've been doing for a long time, is the wiring to the electronics. So I was making my wiring harnesses back in the day, because these units now, when you start getting to 10, 15, I saltwater 20-inch screens or whatever you guys got, 45-inch screens. I don't know. I know they're big, but you need to, the boating, you need to make sure you have really good clean power to that from your batteries. The little days of like 12 gauge wire working and stuff, those are gone. So I used to build my wiring harnesses. Now I'm using one that's out on the market, but having dedicated power that's straight from the units to the battery is very important. One, it's keeping everything safe. You're not going to overheat a wire and melt something and start a fire, and you're going to get the best performance out of your units. The more you're supplying them with clean power, the better they're going to run. They're not going to lag. You're not going to drain your battery. So I think that as we progress, the wiring to these graphs and units is a very critical part of getting the best performance out of them.
What do you think of that? I mean, he obviously has a much more complicated setup than most people would have for obvious reasons.
He's absolutely correct in the wiring. That's the key to all your electronics in running. Most people don't realize that most designed electronics today have a safe margin in them at about 11.6 volts, 11.4 volts. They're going to shut down. They're going to protect themselves. And voltage is important. How you're getting it to it and how clean it is makes a difference in your sounder module. It makes a difference in your transducer. Makes a difference in everything you're running. So I absolutely agree with him. I mean, his setup is with the forward-looking sonar and the rest. We have that in our world. Saltwater, it's not quite as prevalent, only because we're so limited as to what depth it can run at. We use forward-looking sonar on some of the stuff, on even the bigger boats, but we're using it to find bait pods to throw a cast net at. We're not actually targeting a fish other than the bait we need to go catch the other fish. But a lot of that technology in the side imaging sonars and the rest, most of the time, we don't do a lot of backwater fishing down here, even though there's a lot done in the smaller, redfish and snook and stuff. I don't do a lot of it myself. I'd pitch bait up to what Garrett's talking about, and I'd be hooked on the rocks most of the time. So I prefer to drag it behind me than, actually try and throw them at something. So, but yeah, the wiring, the technology and the sonars that he's talking about is just phenomenal. I mean, I've got a buddy of mine that lives up on Lake Tom up in Wisconsin. We take his bass tracker out, and he's got more toys than you know what to do with. But up there, the technology is phenomenal. The cleaner water, they don't have the plankton count we have in the saltwater density, and it makes those things just stand out that we don't see down here. Yeah, incredible. They're advancing it every day. I mean, each manufacturer is in a battle to see who can come up with the newest and greatest stuff. So. Garrett fishes Hummingbird. We don't see a lot of Hummingbird here because it's mainly a prevalent lake and river brand of electronics. You have some people like Lowrance, which are very lake driven, who are partnered with Simrad, who are very offshore driven. But they share the technologies back and forth. So it just makes everybody's game get better all the time.
And I imagine for you, Garrett, I mean, it's on one hand, you can get better all the time. On the other hand, as a professional angler, I mean, you're under tremendous pressure all the time, right? I mean, to constantly be upgrading this stuff and, learning. It's not just, I guess, electronic skills have become synonymous with fishing skills, really, it seems.
In our world, yeah. It's almost, I don't want to say it's becoming like a video game because there's still, I think on the outside, it looks like that when you just see a bunch of guys using all these electronics, but there's still, the natural instincts of fishing will never leave. I mean, a guy can put on $100,000 worth of electronics on his boat, but if you're not around fish, it's not going to really matter. So the natural instincts will never leave. But yeah, certainly if you look at tournament results compared to from last year compared to 2010 and then compared to 2000, the weights are going through the roof, and everyone's saying, "Oh, the fisheries are getting so good," and they might be getting good. I mean, conservation is at an all-time high, but at the same time, we're finding fish and catching fish that we didn't know existed 20 years. So yeah, you have to take your game up to the next level. To win a tournament 20 years ago with those weights, nowadays it'd be 80th place. So it's a constant. You have to continue to push and look for the newest thing and target the fish that maybe the biggest fish in the lake that weren't biting. Now we have access to them and we can see them. So when the new electronics come out, it definitely, you got to kind of revamp your game and continue to learn new things to, help coexist with the new technology that you have.
And Neil, you mentioned that Hummingbird is a more of a freshwater brand, and as well as Lowrance and then Simrad more offshore. I mean, what is it about? And Garrett, I'll first ask you. What do you like about Hummingbird, and what makes it more of an appropriate set of technologies for lakes, rivers, etc.?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's like using a cell phone, right? Some people like iPhones, some people like Galaxies, whatever. So you got to find something that fits how you like it. For me, one, I like touchscreen units. When I'm driving at a high speed, I think it's safer to have a touchscreen if I have to look at something than to try to scroll around. So that's why I'm running Hummingbird Solix. It's all touchscreen, real easy to use. For me, it's easy. I feel like, I know my way around the menus. I know the little shortcuts on how to get through pages faster, how to set a waypoint and edit it really quickly. I've just really learned the units. And I feel like, and for what I'm doing, it's giving me the clearest picture on my images. So the clearer the picture, the less interpreting I have to do, and the more I can see. So I love, and I think with the megahertz technology they're using in freshwater, I mean, it's probably at the top of the list as far as the industry goes for what, the clarity that you're getting. So that's why I'm choosing it. And then on top of that, they have the Lake Master mapping, which is, it's not or the topographic maps. It's not like a guesstimation and a compilation of charts or anything. It's they've gone out and mapped the lakes, and they show exactly what the contours are. And for me, that's huge, because there's a lot of times when we're fishing where we're just running what we call running new water, which is just fishing spots we've never been to, because things in a tournament change so fast. And if I know exactly what the bottom looks like, that's huge for me. So if I know I pull up here and there's going to be a little point that sticks out, and I don't have to worry about whether it exists, I know it exists. That's like, in our world, that's what you want. You don't want to have guesswork out there and try to figure out what the bottom's going to set up like. When you know what it is, it's pretty key.
This is a little off topic, but maybe you know this, Neil, who does this topographic mapping? I mean, is there some kind of central body that all these technology companies buy into?
Yeah, they do it themselves. They hire people out, and they literally go out there with a boat and they just grid the whole lake, and they have some system to record it, and then they put it into a map chip and sell it. They definitely and I know Hummingbird has them. I've seen other brands as well out there doing it now. So
there are some companies that are dedicated to doing nothing but charting, and then they market to each brand. So Raymarine, Simrad, some of these guys, Fruno, can use in the offshore world. There's one called Seymour Charting, which is, believe it or not, the better the satellite technology gets out there, kind of like you think of Google Earth, they're using satellites to actually map the bottom as well. So you get a lot more bottom contours, you got a lot more real-time data, and the satellite technology, whether it's is shared. When you look at something like the offshore weather that we use, which is all provided by XM, each manufacturer buys into that weather, but some of them take it another step further. And on Garmin's new GXM54, you can get fish mapping, it's called, where they'll actually give you the plankton count of the surface. They'll give you sea surface temperatures. They'll give you everything right there. And and if you want to target a specific species, they'll even show you the hot spots right on your chart plotter for where they're more likely to be, just based off that satellite technology. So we use technology kind of like Garrett's using, only we're using it offshore now, trying to chase mahi or chase tuna or chase sailfish, or we're looking at similar things, only in a different world. So it's just how it's being delivered to the boat. But from a charting standpoint, it used to be all government charts. That was where everybody got their base data from. But when you're over in the Bahamas, some of the Bahamas haven't been charted since the 1800s. So they're telling you got 60 feet of water, and you get there and there's a reef now on the bottom, then you're only in 30 foot of water, or you're only in 20 foot of water. So we see a lot of discrepancies in the offshore charting, much more than the backwater charting, but it's getting better.
That's crazy. So, I mean, really the differences in these technologies, I mean, there seems to be quite a considerable difference in their, the mapping and, contouring data that they're each, offering their users. I mean, that seems to be quite a difference to me.
Well, it is, because I think it's a lot easier to go map a 10,000 acre lake than the ocean. So I'm sure. I'm sure, and the more we explore, and that's interesting. I didn't know about the satellites being able to do it now. So if that starts taking off, I mean, you could, once that's powerful enough, you can map the whole world in the click of a button. So that's pretty neat, and that's going to change the offshore fishing game forever.
Well, we're getting now where we run, like I said, in our world, we're running. Sometimes we'll run 125, 130 miles out. And when you're running a 50-foot sport fish and, you're getting 0.6 gallons to the mile, you really want to be a little bit more accurate as to what you're after and where you're going to, because it's a big world out there, and it's nothing worse than not finding fish on the bottom. And it's a whole different story if you find them and they just don't want to eat whatever you've got on the boat, but at least you were on the fish. But we run so far that we want everything we can get our hands on. The biggest radar we can put up there to search for birds, the biggest, the satellite downloads, because getting caught in weather out there is no fun either. And it's not like we can turn around and get under shelter anywhere soon.
So are you tempted, Garrett, to get into at one point abandon the freshwater fishing and pursue more saltwater?
I will say I've actually only saltwater fished twice, which I'm not happy about. I did one day back in like the backwaters around some mangroves, and then we did one day offshore, and I loved it. I mean, to me it's so much fun. The fish are unbelievably aggressive. They obviously are super strong. The fight is a lot more exciting than bass fishing, but I don't know. I don't know if I'd ever want to do it full time. I mean, I love bass fishing. It's when you do think of it compared to saltwater fishing, is it silly? Yeah, catching 4 and 5 pound fish and getting excited over it. But it's all relative. I mean, our competitions are very intense, and guys come across the world for it. So the competitiveness is very high. I feel like you got really skilled fishermen there, and to me, it's more about the species of fish is fun to fish for, and it lives in a variety of places, and it's really diverse. So you're always getting something different. It's not, necessarily doing similar things each day. But to me, it's about competing and testing myself against, one of the best group of anglers in the world. That's where I get the thrill out of it, is just competing and testing yourself. So as long as bass continues to, draw in people from all over the world to compete for it, I assume I will too.
That's awesome. Well, this was a really great discussion. I think that folks will find this interesting and learn a lot. I learned a lot. So it's great. Before I let you guys go, just why don't we close by asking your favorite places to fish? Neil, do you want to, share some of your favorite spots?
Probably. I mean, if we're going to go fishing out of Southwest Florida, I'd rather run 100 miles south to Marathon and go fish the other side where we can troll. We can bottom fish, we can yellowtail with grouper, snapper on the bottom. We troll dolphin, tuna. I just prefer fishing that end of the world than going 100 miles offshore here and fishing on the bottom. Just a different challenge, and you have so many more things you can fish for. It's fishing from north to south is completely different. When you're fishing out of Cape Hatteras, and you're fishing the banks, trolling for wahoo, they're all different species, all going to bite different and all going to troll different. So it's kind of a, targeted species and what you're running for gear. And we always have a challenge trying to find the fish. So
where are your favorite spots, Garrett?
I really love the St. Lawrence River up in New York. It's a really cool place. It's got a lot of like bluff rock. It's got big old castles. It's just really picturesque. And then the fishing is really good. The smallmouth fishing's great. Catch a lot of like big walleye, pike, all sorts of species. Water's really clean. It's just like it's like a vacation-y feeling place to be. And then the fishing's great. So I gotta say, St. Lawrence River, Lake Ontario, that area.
Well, this was a great discussion, guys. Thank you so much for joining me, and happy fishing.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Parts View Exchange Talks Boating podcast. Is it almost time for routine maintenance on your outboard or Mercruiser marine engine? Check out our easy-to-use maintenance kits at partsview.com. And for free shipping, use the coupon code PVTalksBoating, a special perk for our podcast listeners. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram for boating knowledge, to keep in touch with the Parts View community, and for special sales and promotions. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast, and check out the show notes for the coupon code just mentioned, more information about Parts View and the products we offer, as well as our boating blog, the Parts View Exchange. And a big thanks to Min for performing the original music featured within this podcast.